Good Monday morning, everyone, or happy Monday. It is the last Monday of July. You guys, this year has flown by.
Thank
August
God.
is tomorrow, which is an exciting day, and we'll talk about it here shortly. But you guys listen to Author Talk with me, Amy Russell Ferd, and our lovely guest today is Stephanie Ellis. Like, your name just goes, Stephanie. I can't just say Stephanie. It's Stephanie Ellis. So, but let's
And
dive into the weekend.
Stephanie's coming to us from England, which I always love it when
Oh,
we have like international guests. Because no,
she's
No,
in
no,
Welsh.
no, no,
where are
no.
you from?
I'm in
Where are you
Wales.
Wales,
I'm in
coming from?
Wales.
Wales.
In
I'm in
Wales.
Wales,
Oh well,
just over the
sorry.
border.
From that island with multiple pieces to it. In Europe. I
Yeah,
love when we have international guests. It's like super cool, man.
yeah. I only
Welcome from
interrupted
Wales.
then. Thank you. I only interrupted them because otherwise I'd have everybody shouting at me saying Wrexham's not in England, it's in Wales, and
We
they're
don't want
quite a
that to happen.
nationalistic lot.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen to you. So thank you so much. So let's dive into the weekend. So my husband went away. So you guys, if you've been listening pretty much all this month, I would go to my mom's on the weekend and spend the weekend so Josh could paint my house. Well, this weekend was his work buddy river trip that he went on. So it's been like 3 weeks, I guess, since I've really technically seen Josh. So he went on his river trip and left me alone with the kids again. So we had a pizza picnic on the floor. And besides that, my black cat went missing last night because he thinks that that's funny. Bruno chased him up and down the street. My dog is now called the lightning dog because he was hauling it up and down the street, and I didn't know that. Yes.
How did you allow Josh to leave without finishing and cleaning up his painting job? Because obviously there's still a background to conceal the mess in your workspace.
Russell. Yes. Well, because if you want me to be completely honest, I did take the kids away so he could paint my house. So we both sacrificed. I was with my terrorist while he had solitude. And so I felt like he kind of, needed just a reset anyways, because he'd been working really hard and painting and trying to get stuff done. So I took another one for the team and watched my children or terrorist alone on my own. But we did good. We had parties, we had like little girls' time, everything. And we're nighttime potty training. So that's been a lot of fun. So I've been staying up really late to prevent accidents. So it was fun though. I mean, it really wasn't that bad. He came back like refreshed. And plus, Russell, he likes to be the camp dad with all these younger guys. So he likes to have the food and cut it and cook it and grill it. And that makes him happy. So that was our weekend collectively in the Ravi Chandran household. So what did everybody else do this weekend? Nobody go at the same
Nobody,
time.
then I'll talk, so nobody talk. So I got together with the stage actor that I told everyone about last week again and had another cigar. And I met his fiance. This is somebody that not everyone, if I gave you his name, not everyone would know his name, but everyone would recognize his face.
Okay.
And uh, like I said, I met his fiance, and I'd given him a suggestion during the last time we'd had a cigar together that why? Because he has this beautiful baritone voice, and he's trained. He's a Shakespearean trained actor, Stephanie, and uh, mainly doing comedies and King Lear, which I criticized him for, but that's a whole different conversation. And I said, well, are you making? You could make easy money reading authors' books for Audible. Are you doing that? And he was like, no, I'm not doing that. So in 1 week, he'd already called his agent and started setting up to start working on doing Audible books, and he already had his first 2 Audible books that he's going to do. So it was
Nice.
so we talked about that. It was a great conversation.
Nice. That's awesome. Fern, what did you do this weekend?
So I'm in the middle of rearranging my area again, of reorganizing it. It's funny how when you organize your space, it remains organized for a select amount of time, and then you start like not putting things back in the place where you deemed they should live. And soon you have a hot mess. And then it's time to reorganize everything and rethink what you wanted to do. So that's kind of this weekend was a reorganization of the mess. I'm sitting at my chaise lounge instead of my desk because my desk is now covered with stacks of things that I am sorting through to decide where will they live for this time period, you know. So yeah, and plus I had a lot of, you know, school material from my teaching time, and I had Verston and Jen donate me a lot of school material, so I had to sort through a lot of school material and decide what to keep, what to go, all this good stuff. So yeah, mine was more on the lines of organizing. What about you, Stephanie? What'd you do this weekend?
Well, it's work of a kind. I'm doing an online workshop in September on sacrifice and ritual within folk horror, very much on the sacrificial side. So I've been working on that PowerPoint and the script for that the whole weekend. So I've been looking at all sorts of ways of how people are killed in folk horror, which has been very, very
Ooh.
cheerful reading, but it's great fun. Stick them on a bonfire. I don't know, all sorts of different offerings. You know, trying to get it away from the fires until whether it might be a drowning, it might be something else, or you know, the throat cut. But just trying to move away from what everybody expects. But it's taken a lot more work than I thought it would be. Partly because I enjoy the research, so I've been watching 1 or 2 films as well. So I saw Jugface the other day for the first time, which is very good, and I'd like to rewatch Apostle, which is another very good film. So forget the gore, but they're very good films. But it's this sacrificial element within folk horror that's been a lot of my focus lately. I'm still ploughing through it. I've got 2 or 3 slides left, and I'm trying to do it in such a way that yes, there's a content warning at the start and spoiler alert because of the nature of it. But I can't have very gruesome images, like, you know, all the way through. So, but trying to keep it entertaining without putting people off, it's a bit of a challenge.
I could see that. I don't know a whole lot about folk horror, Stephanie. Like, I know on one of the book launches that me and you were on together, it was all about kind of folk horror and they were all talking, and I'm not as familiar with that. So I have to do research about kind of what I probably am familiar with it and just don't know it as folk horror, which is probably the truth. But
So,
I have
Stephanie,
to
what
educate
is
it.
folk horror? Why don't you
Yeah.
tell the audience?
It's a subgenre of horror that has certain elements that make it sort of stand out. So quite often it's a rural setting. It will be an isolated community or maybe a cult. They have skewed beliefs. The landscape itself is often very much a character within it, because where the people live, if you're a village or a hamlet or something like that, your lives depend on the land. And it's very much this idea of these communities carrying out certain rituals in return for their prosperity, their good health, their survival. And quite often you'll get a stranger coming into that area, and then all sorts of things happen. They may end up as a sacrifice. I think the Wicker Man is one of the best examples of that. I'll go the 1973 version, not the Nicolas Cage, because I still haven't watched it and I'm still not going to. Apostle is another good film of sacrifice of humans, and that's where the element is. It's not always humans that are sacrificed. It could be your animals, or it could be, well, if you're female, sometimes you might have to carry a child that you don't necessarily want to carry. So it's a bargain that's carried out with whatever deity, and it's, I say, it's usually very rural, but it could be
Would
set within
you
a city, although that'd be quite a challenge. But it's a very spooky, eerie sort of setting, and it's just, I don't know, it's because I grew up in the countryside and I've had a bit of nostalgia for that time lately. As I've got older, you want to go back to the places that you wanted to escape from when you were a teen. But I really like the countryside, so it's been a way of bringing that into my writing as well and twisting it a little bit, because human history has lots of legends and folklore and all sorts of things like that. You just bring back into the stories and twist them,
Well,
take them to the dark
if you think
side.
if you think about the Grimm fairy tales, I mean, technically those the originals were really horrific. Did you see the movie The Village? It's a little old. I think
Yes.
Joaquin Phoenix is in it. He
Yeah.
that one was very much a great example of what you're talking about, like the folk horror, the little
Yeah.
isolated village,
Yeah.
and
It's,
the secrets within that.
oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
I loved
Yeah.
that one. I was like, "Woo, edge of your seat" kind of stuff.
Yeah, always the isolation, always the secrets, and the sort of journey of discovery of what's going to come next. And you think, oh my God. But yeah, I find it actually great fun to write. You know, I don't know, it has its dark side, but you can create your monstrous characters and so that they almost make you smile in a way because they're so strange. There's that little human element in them. But I don't find it, yes, there's a serious side to it, but I don't find it hard to write. I don't know what that says about me, but I just set my monsters loose and they can just go and have a good time in whatever way they want to.
And Stephanie, from this side of the dark side in this podcast, we want to thank those listeners that listen on our podcast. We're top 10 from the ratings we've received, top 10 independent book podcast in America. We're very humbled by it. Most people don't watch us on Monday mornings, but they listen to us during the week on the way to work or while they're working out. And we want to thank them. Amy, where can people find us?
Sorry, my daughter just slammed the door into the wall. Full disclaimer, my kids are back home. You can find us anywhere on Amazon, Spotify, anywhere that you can listen to podcasts. You can find us. iTunes, Google, all of those places. But like Russell said, we're just excited that here comes my door shutting. We're just excited that everyone listens to us. This was Russell's vision that we've all helped create over the 8 years and that we're all happy to be a part of. And we've talked to some amazing authors and others within the writing and publishing community. And it's definitely an act of love for all of us. But with all that being said, I do want to mention before we go into the author interview portion, Stephanie Ellis's latest book, The Woodcutter, comes out tomorrow. So make sure that you go and grab your copy. I know that the ebook will be 99 cents, but we are doing a book launch celebration tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. I don't know if that's like British Standard Time. Is that right? Okay. See, time zones aren't my thing. But 8 p.m. British time, 2 p.m. Central, and all the other time zones within that. So make sure that you come and celebrate with Bridget's Gate Press and Stephanie Ellis and I, and just hear more about the Woodcutter and the love and research and passion that went into that novel. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it on over to Fern Brady and let's get Stephanie talking about her books.
Well, I wanted to actually start with the book launch, event because, you know, uh, prior to COVID, book launches were always sort of live and in person. You had an event, and now I feel like we are beginning to see kind of a hybrid. Like you have an online event, and then some people are also having live events. So, talk to us about your book launch party and, those who are viewing us and they want to join in, what can they expect? How does that work in the online platform?
Uh, Well, Amy does a lot of it. I will say she sets it up, and the publishers will be there as well. So basically, between the publisher and Creative Edge, they arrange a time with you for your book launch, and ask who you would like to have on it. And that there is a sort of little set formula, but it does fit in very much with whatever book is being talked about as to how the conversation goes. So we chat about the book, but we also chat about other things related to maybe other aspects of our work that link into that. I will say that I've done a few now as a guest. I've never had one of my own, but I'm partly thankful that these things are online because I am not one for public speaking or chatting in public, and it's got easier in the past year or so since I've done podcasts and I took part in running one. But I am very much like a lot of writers. We'd rather just hide away in a corner. You do your writing, then put it out there and say, read it, but leave me alone. but I've learned you've had to get out there and you have to start speaking to people, and doing this online with lovely people like yourself actually helps you get over that hurdle of maybe talking about your work and getting your face in front of other people. So it's a step towards doing things in public. I have done some panels at some events and things now, but again, that is another step on. So things like this are quite ideal. I think they are becoming more popular again. That there was a phase, I think, a few years back when you would hear of launch parties, but I think people tended to ignore them a little bit because their lives weren't as much online as they are since lockdown happened and we went through all that. It's become an aspect of our lives which has been quite common, and so people are more willing to give their time to an online event, and they'll come along and sort of listen to you. So at the launch party, they'll hear about the book, they'll hear about what maybe inspired it. They'll hopefully there's a bit of a reading. I was looking for bits that I might talk about. But the other authors can actually talk about their own work as well, so it's not necessarily all about the person and the book that's there. It's as much for everybody else involved. It's for the publisher to talk about their passion for books. It's about Creative Edge being able to, show what they can do for people. And so it's just a fun way to talk about books in general.
So it's really focused more like around the genre itself and sort of what the readership of these books would enjoy, so they can get to know different books. Who are your guests? Do you have anyone that you want to give a shout out to that's coming tomorrow night?
I know a few have been confirmed. There's Kev Harrison, who's a horror writer. Great, he's done some folk horror as well. He's a really good writer. He lives in He's British, but he lives in Portugal. He's back over here teaching at the moment. There is Coy Hall, who's a professor of history over in the States, and he does a lot of historical horror, folk horror. I can't remember who else, Amy. Can you remember?
Well, I will be there, and your
Yeah.
publisher, Budget Gates Press, Heather and Steve will also be there. Your publicist, Mickey,
Yeah.
might be able to make it. In terms of other authors, I'm not 100% sure. I think you covered most of them.
Yeah, I've just
But
remembered. Yeah, I've just remembered
yeah,
one. There's a reviewer. He's known as Horror Reads, and he's based out in Cambodia. He's another
yeah.
American. He does a bit of writing himself, but he's always read and supported my folk horror work. So I thought I'd really like him on board as a sort of thank you. So it gives him a little bit of a platform for what he does, because reviewers are worth their weight in gold. And when you've got someone who enjoys your work, it's a real
Oh,
bonus. And he has really sort of promoted what my own stories. I mean, yes, reviewers are perfectly happy to say no to I might not fit what they like, and that's
yeah.
fine. We're all subjective. So every time someone says, oh, they don't like what I've written, I just have to remind myself that there's books by people like, I will say, James Joyce's Ulysses, which people say is a
Oh,
classic. I have never been able to get past the first page. People keep saying, read it, it's wonderful, and it's no. So if you do get a bad review, just remind yourself of how you feel about a book that you haven't been able to read. So that's
Stephanie,
where
Ulysses took me a whole year to read. For every chapter, I had to read, before each chapter, I had to read a secondhand source to tell me what I was about to read. Then I'd read the chapter. Then I'd have to reread that to figure out what I just read before went on to the next chapter. It took a whole year. I agree with you. I don't think it's a masterpiece. It was so much work.
Well, but
and
I,
it's
I,
very true.
Well,
I
but
was
Stephanie, you're going to be reading from your book during your book launch. You're going to be
yeah.
reading one of your excerpts, and Heather, which is one of the three publishers or the co-owners, going to be reading the spot that she heard her mother's voice, which is what made her want to offer you a contract to publish this book. So you will get the experience and kind of dive into your writing and the book and different kind of parts of it. So that is kind of what it is, having all the other authors on to support you and what they thought of your book, because a lot of them have read it. So it is going to be focused around your book and the folk horror genre and all these other authors, but we will get some taste from your book and what people can expect and draw in some excitement for your
Yeah,
book.
I'm really interested in hearing where Heather actually decides that voice came in, and especially because she's told me, or she's told a lot of people, she's got a thing about trees. She doesn't really like them. Where they've moved to, they've got trees around the house now. But when you think about folk
Yeah.
horror, and especially the woodcutter, I mean, there's this great big wood called God Be Gone Woods that surrounds the village and sort of encroaches upon it. It's this landscape coming alive effectively. And I thought, they've accepted this book, but she doesn't like trees. So where is it in the book that it really
She
got?
sounds like Fern. She sounds exactly like Fern.
Yeah, me and nature, we have an agreement of mutual non-aggression. I don't go into it. It doesn't come to me. It's all good. Nature's good outside. Outside. That's where it needs to stay. But let's talk about the book, because we've talked about the launch and kind of the party and who's going to be all there. Talk to us a little bit about the genesis of the book. I am always super curious about where did the idea for this particular book come from, and just in general also, I just want to know, like, what drew you to this genre of all the genres you could write in. What brought you to folk horror? I find all those stories super amazing, how the different authors come to their voice and their genre. So share with us kind of the genesis of your writing and this particular book as well.
Okay. Well, horror in general was accidental. I've been writing since I'm 59 now. I started getting published when I was about 49, 50, and I wasn't writing much before that. So I am a writer who's come to it later in life. So anyone out there who's getting on a bit like me, it's never too late. You find the time that you can write. And for me, raising a family and everything else, that all got in the way. But that was my time. And I started entering little competitions in the writing magazine, and not getting anywhere. I did a short story course, and they said, you've got a sort of quirky voice, but you'll probably win competitions, which I never did, but you're not right for People's Friend Star magazines or the women's magazines. So then I looked at the market listings, and there was one that was it was just a few lines saying it's a horror anthology, and they wanted horror stories relating to potatoes. And I wrote a story called Death is Not a Potato, which I've still got. And it wasn't accepted. It was dark-ish, but it wasn't horror. That was my first go. But the editor, Teresa Derwin, who I'm friends with, and she still writes horror. So she's quite active in the community, but that little publisher sort of died ages ago. But she said, send other stories in for other anthology calls. So there were these strange little calls, and I think one was World War II zombie stories, and another one was the Last Supper, stories about the Last Supper, and I'd write them, and they were accepted. So I seemed to get a little run of 6 on the trot, and I wrote horror in general. Um, but then the folk horror started to come in because, as I say, my background growing up in this pub in the middle of nowhere. I was born in Worcestershire, Evesham, but then we moved to Shropshire, which is a very rural county just over the border from Wales. And I grew up in a pub from about the age of 8 or 9, stayed there until I was 17 when we moved to get into another pub. But it wasn't even a hamlet, really. I mean, you'd have a house about half a mile down the road, another cottage about another mile or so the other way. There were farms. My primary school was 5 miles away. My secondary school, when I went to when I was 11, was 10 miles the other direction. So as a pub, it was the middle of nowhere. But we were very busy. My dad built it up, so you got a lot of custom in the summer from people in the cities, from Birmingham, Wolverhampton, the West Midlands. They'd all come over and visit, all ethnicities. It was amazing, really. And then the other days, the quieter days, and in the winter, our traditional our regulars were the farmers. And just remembering them and what they got up to, the way the seasons changed, my walks to school in the twilight, well, home from school in twilight, it all seemed to fit perfectly to go into a folk horror vibe. I thought I can bring back my memories of that time. and relive it a little way within the realms of folk horror. There was a short story I wrote um, called Way of the Mother, and it's related to the Five Turns of the Wheel and Reborn, which are my folk horror novels. But there's a character in there. There is an element of sacrifice, but the character was called Johnny Hedgerow, and we had a barman called, I think his name was actually John Smith, but it was John was his first name, and he would do the hedges around the pub the traditional way, where he'd sort of splice them and then weave them in and out, so there would be a living hedge. And I used him and that traditional element, that traditional skill within that particular folk horror story. And I just find it's quite comforting in a way, because you can bring these characters, these people back into your life in a strange sort of way. He never killed anyone. He was completely harmless.
Well, we would hope not.
Yeah,
Only in fiction, right? Only in fiction.
yeah. I remember
So
watching
tell
him.
me, tell us about the God Begone Wood, because that the name is very intriguing, and I find that in these stories, of course, like you're saying, the setting is such a huge element. It's almost like another character itself. How did you come up with this God Begone Woods? And without giving anything away, what are some of the things that readers should kind of look for as they're reading the book?
Well, there were certain elements that I decided I wanted to include in the woodcut. I wanted to do it a little bit different to the Five Turns. I wanted to be more in the depth, more present, so everybody knew it was actually, now. Sometimes my other books were a little bit, that it could have been in the past. It wasn't, but it was. I wanted to make it explicitly clear that it was present day. I I wanted to bring in this idea of reality TV. I thought this is something that everybody watches. There's always reality TV. There's always these setups. You've got things on exotic islands or in Australia or wherever. And I thought, I'm going to put a reality TV in the middle of nowhere in this little village setting. And the one thing I remember, it's some years ago now, but there was, I don't know whether you've heard of Derren Brown, who's this magician, hypnotist type person. And he's quite famous over here. And he did a TV series on one of our channels called Zombie Apocalypse. And he managed to convince this one person that there had been this apocalypse and that everyone around him was a zombie. And I thought I would love to bring in that element of convincing people that what they are seeing is real. So I created this legend of the woodcutter and grandma. And I thought if we get people reenacting it, or a certain element of it, I wanted to keep them guessing all the way through as to what was real or not. Was what the viewer's seeing real, but also was what the was I'm going to get my what's that, but those who were being set up, those who were performing, was what they were experiencing, was that real or were they acting? They weren't quite sure as they went through. So I kept trying to keep it so that people would have to be almost second guessing themselves, and you would go on this journey with these very unreliable narrators, because they didn't really know what was happening. At times I did think I could explain a bit more, but I thought, no, this person doesn't know what's happening. He's set in this reality show, which he knows is a show, but there's all these elements coming in, and I wanted us to see that through his eyes. So there was the element of reality TV being brought in and being exploited, but then the naming of the place. I watch programs like Midsummer Murders. I don't know whether you get that over there. It's a very cozy British rural mystery, and they have these lovely names for little villages. I think Badger's Drift and things like that. And I wanted something a little bit quirky and almost cozy in my folk horror. So God Be Gone Woods doesn't sound cozy, and the Village of Little Hatchet doesn't sound cozy, but it's exactly the sort of name that you might find coming up in an Agatha Christie or these Midsummer Murders, something like that. And I deliberately wanted to have names like that, because when you look around our countryside, there are all sorts of strange names that do exist. And I thought I'd make it relevant to the woodcutter. So where is the woodcutter going to be? He's going to be in a village with some name that links to him, so Little Hatchet. The area is actually called, I think it was the Axe Valley or something like that. So there is the axe element comes into it. And what are you going to call a wood if the devil lurks inside it? It's going to be God begone woods. So it plays a
Oh,
little bit on history as well, because back in the day, your Puritans would have really strange names, and I think there was a name. I'm trying to remember who it was. It'll probably come to me, but there was a Protestant member of Parliament, and it was God was in his name, but they would meld these names together, and they were really quirky. So I thought I would love that element to go into my story. So it's almost a cozy folk horror in a way, but the reality of it is that it's anything but that. So you've got the modern sort of emphasis on the reality side, but then you've got the legend, and then there's another aspect of, I don't know whether you've ever looked at old pamphlets from the 16th, 17th centuries with the woodcuts. You'll have seen the engravings around on the internet. And if you look back, they have these weird little stories of their beliefs in witchcraft at the time. So I brought in this pamphlet, which someone has on, where it's got the legend of the woodcutter and grandma from the 17th century, and that's what's fed into the present. So I was making up my own sort of fairy tale legend. I was bringing in my own reality show, and then this little cozy setting just to see if people would believe in that or not. But it's all things I wanted to do. So it's different threads really, but it's great fun to do.
now you've got a couple of other books also kind of in the same vein of folk horror.
Mhm.
Are you looking at doing series, or are each of your books kind of a standalone novel? How are you organizing your world?
Yeah, the Woodcutter is standalone. It could possibly go into a series. I think the way I've ended it, but I hadn't really thought of it as such. But it does have a clear ending, although one that people don't expect, and I'm not going to give away. The five
Yeah,
turns of
that's
the
good.
wheel. The five turns of the wheel. That was always with the intention of a follow up, which is Reborn. And although that could end there, that again, that one had a clear ending, unlike Five Turns, which sort of hinted at a follow. Reborn links into Five Turns in such a way that if a reader picks that one up first, they can read it as a standalone. There's enough in there to give them the backstory of the traditions and what to expect, and the characters in there and where they're coming from. So it can stand alone, but it does have the same sort of characters through it. And now I'm writing a third one in that series, which I want to be a good old festive Yuletide romp with the characters that have been introduced before, maybe introducing one or two others. But I thought stick some in the snow with gifts of all sorts, make it a proper festive read in the folk horror tradition. So that is very much a series. There may be others after that, but I'm not sure yet. I would like to write one or two more other folk horrors that are standalone and explore that a little bit more. I'd love to write one that's an urban setting, but I haven't quite worked out how to do that yet. I'm sure others are out there. So if anyone's watching and knows of a folk horror in an urban setting that they would highly recommend, I would love to read it.
How about a second season in your TV series that you put
Mm.
in your book?
Yeah, the reality TV idea is really compelling. Like, because you could totally keep going with that, like the next season.
Yeah, I'd have to check back and make sure that I haven't killed off any of the presenters.
Well, that's new characters you get to develop.
It's always fun. Like, what have you found in terms of your writing process, right? There are authors who have to plot everything out. They already know before they even begin to write what the story is going to be and how it's going to flow and who's going to die and who's going to live. And then there are authors who are more discovery writers, right? We're pantsers who just sit down to an empty page and we discover along with everything else what's going to happen. And sometimes it surprises you who ends up dying. Which kind of author are you?
I am a pantser through and through. I don't know what's going to happen. I see a character or I get an idea for a character, and they're not necessarily doing anything, but I just suddenly see them and I think, right, what are they actually looking at? And I sort of shift into their head. So I just sit and look out through their eyes, and then they just start walking or talking or doing things, and I follow with them. I write it down. I don't plan at all. They just keep going. Sometimes I have to, well, not restart, but I shift my first chapter. I mean, the one I've done at the moment for the third book in the Five Turns series, I had this first chapter which I thought was great, and then I carried on writing, and I thought, no, there's a bit of a change, and I went back to am I echoing a bit now?
Oh, I don't hear it echo. Is it echoing? Oh.
All right. It's all right. It's just the sound sounded a bit funny here. But I've put that middle chapter is now back, is further on, and I've got a new first chapter. So I've written new chapters, and they keep shifting the start further down the line. So it evolves. I mean, the Woodcutter, when I was writing it, I didn't know how it was going to end, and then suddenly that ending came to me, and I thought, oh, so the twist that the reviewer spoke about the other day, he said he didn't see it coming. I didn't either. But that it's about it's about the 3/4 of the way through mark, an ending idea will come to me, and then I just follow that through. But otherwise, if I'm sort of stuck, I don't really get writer's block, but I'll have scenes in my head that I haven't worked how to get to yet. So I'll write those scenes and put them in certain places, and then I just try and do little bits in between. So I always call it like dot to dot writing. So what was the beginning would end up in the middle. What was further down might be moved back to the beginning, and it goes like that. I will say with the Five Turns of the Wheel, when I was doing that one, I had all the characters set up to actually die, and then I swerved at the end and I changed it so that I could write sequels. So yeah, so
Yeah, yeah.
it's just make it as you go along.
I love that because I know that sometimes you're like, okay, in this part of the book, somebody has to die, but then the person who ends up being in there, you're like, I don't really want to get rid of that character. So yeah, sometimes you save them at the last minute. They were intended for death. So as you're thinking of your books, you're thinking of continuing the Wheel series, and the Woodcutter. You mentioned research. Okay, you mentioned research, and it's,
Mm.
people always think that writers of fiction, don't necessarily need all that research because you're doing it all, making it all up. But we do. So, what are some of the most coolest things that you have discovered in the middle of your research that didn't make it into the book, but those rabbit holes we go into as authors? What are some of the coolest things you've discovered?
I think some of it are the YouTube videos. Um, a lot of the things I've included in stories are based on real traditions. It's like the Morris dancing, the rapper sword dancing, and I did a story about the Haxey Hood, which is basically a football match between two whole villages, or a rugby style match where they just throw this leather sphere between each other, and it's just a big scrummage with hundreds of people getting involved across the countryside. And these videos exist on YouTube, and you can go and watch them, and you think, I never knew that. I'd like to go and see that in real life. There's the Morris dancing over here, you think of as being men in white stockings waving a handkerchief around. But there's actually this tradition of border Morris, which is a lot more brutal. It's they're all in black, in ragged clothes, and it looks very paganistic. And then there's also fire festivals up in Scotland I'd love to visit. I I did go and see a burning of a Wicker Man some years back down in
Ooh.
it's a place called Butser Hill, and over May they created this Wicker Man, and we went to watch it with no sacrifices involved. There was a lot of folk music played and things like that. But
Are you
watching
sure
that,
about that? Are you sure about that?
yeah, but it's a great evening, and then just watching it burn against the night sky in that's on top of this hill where there had been a Celtic settlement. It was just really inspiring. So there's all sorts of things within the research that make you think these are actually real, not necessarily as bloody and gory as you read, but there are all these little customs that have created these legends, and seeing that some of them still exist in one form or another, it's really interesting.
That is very cool. That sounds like Russell would enjoy visiting some of these.
Oh
I'm
yeah.
looking at your face.
How do you find these sort of events on YouTube? I mean, what would you put in the search engine to find that? Because you're right, Fern. I'm dying to see this stuff. It's like
Um,
Yeah, I
watching
do. I could see it in
Portuguese
your
and
face. I was
Spanish
like,
bull chases.
I've got a book somewhere, which probably hidden behind there. It's called it's the English Year, and it's a year of rituals and customs, or folklore and customs, and it goes through the whole year, and it mentions it's got various dates and the traditions that were performed on that date. And that's where I came across the Haxie Hood, and I went online and had a look at this, and it was going for years. So you can find some very old versions of it, and then there's talk about the hobby horse, which is an element in a lot of mummers plays. If you watch The Wicker Man, there's that procession where they're all dressed up and someone is this hobby horse. But there's one called Hobby Horse. You drop the H, or H. I'll probably say it wrong. Down in Cornwall, and it's a really creepy looking horse. But you see that, I think it's Padstow, but you see that on YouTube as well. So I'd got a book of customs, and then I went searching to see what I could find online.
this is cool. This sounds like, it sounds like somebody who is real into the genre would be able to do like a whole tour, like a vacation around these customs and visiting these events and seeing them live, and then comparing them to some of the books and movies we've all seen.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see. There's a book I've got, but oh, it's not there. I get Hellebore magazine, which is a little one about folk horror. It is, oh,
Hellborn
no,
magazine.
it's that.
Aha.
It comes out every so often, but what they've done is created a guide to Britain, or to the UK, and it's got all the sites in there and a little bit of the history. So there's places to visit. So that does exist, and that they produced it, but it's not right here. I don't know where I need to reorganize my bookshelves.
That is very cool. Well, as we are coming down to the last few minutes, I'm going to toss it back to Amy for closure, because, we're starting to get that eye from the timekeeper.
True. No one wants the eye from Russell. I didn't give you the disclaimer, Stephanie, about Russell, and he's behaved today, so you don't have to have the disclaimer.
Well, it's easy to behave when she calls you out on quoting Shakespeare.
I know, that was
even
so
before
great.
the show started. It was like, whoa, we have an awesome guest. She calls me out when I say I can quote something. So she's impressive.
It was awesome.
I do have to say my last thing.
Go for it.
Which is, Stephanie, number one, how much work and how did you work the unreliable narrator? Because I'm kind of in love with that particular subject right now. And number two, where can listeners on the podcast find your books?
The unreliable narrator is something I'd never done before, but I wanted to do it. I wanted to see if I could do it. So it's very much a challenge for myself. And there are two of them within the book. And they're both, when I say that folk horror is very much about a stranger coming back, these two main characters, they were children who used to live there, who went away, and they've come back. But there are certain aspects involved in their past which lead the reader to sort of think, well, maybe they're not telling the truth, and they'll see that as the story develops. Some of it is psychological, some of it may be attributed to to the landscape, others may be attributed to certain elements which I don't want to talk about, because otherwise that gives it away a little as well. But it was very hard, and as I wrote it, I usually get somebody to have a read of my longer work. I did get someone to read it through to make sure that I hadn't confused anybody, because as I wrote it, I thought I might be confusing myself here by doubting me as much as the characters who are taking the story along. So it was something I'd always wanted to do. I'd heard about people having that sort of narrator, and I thought, well, I'll have a go at it and see if I can manage it. And it seems to have worked, but I did not want to confuse anybody, because what was the point of having a story that nobody got in the end? So I did make sure that I had somebody to read it, and it seems to have turned out okay. The few bits of feedback I've got so far have been very positive. I've had some really good reviews, so I've been quite pleased about that. And if anybody wants to pre-order it or to find it, if you just go to bridgetscapepress.com, they'll find a link to the book there.
Yes.
And about it.
Yep, it's also on Amazon as well.
Yeah.
But for in closing comments, statements, questions from you before I close this out.
No, just thank you for being with us. Congratulations on your new book. And I'm hoping your party tomorrow night is going to be an awesome success. Amy, are you going to put a link so that some of our viewers might be able to go hop on and enjoy and party with Stephanie?
Yep, it's actually going to be live on AuthorTalk and on my channel tomorrow at 2 p.m. our time, 8 p.m. British time. And we're excited because Stephanie has been on a guest on several others, and now it's her turn to shine. And so I'm so excited. And I love the title of your book, The Woodcutter. It's very intriguing for me. So I'm very excited. But Stephanie, thanks for taking time out of your evening to come and hang out and talk to us about The Woodcutter, and for spending time with me tomorrow. I'm really excited about it, and I'm excited about your new novel.
I just want to say thank you for inviting me on and letting me waffle as I usually do. I tend to go off at a tangent, and I'm almost tempted to go off at a tangent and talk about Shakespeare Unleashed, which is a horror book that's come out with all sorts of stories and poems in there. And I've got a found sonnet in there, a horror poem based on King John. So if you're into Shakespeare and you like horror, then Shakespeare Unleashed, and that's from Crystal Lake Publishing and Monstrous Books. So that's for the Shakespeare fans. So I'd say that. But otherwise, The Woodcutter, I had such fun writing it, and I hope everybody enjoys reading it. And thank you for letting me talk about him.
Oh, absolutely. Stephanie, you're always such a delight. Whenever I get to actually talk to you virtually, it's so much fun. But we hope that you have a great rest of your evening. Everybody, we hope you have a great Monday, a great rest of your week, and we will catch you all next Monday.